I was in junior high and I took a trip out to Calgary. And in the seat pocket on my way back, there was a Time magazine. And it was all Watergate back then. But there was an article on Doug Henning and magic. And there was an exposure of how to do this sawing in half. And sawing a woman in half, I just was like, oh, I got to build this. And I went home and tried to build it. Didn't work, but I got into magic at that point. I went into high school in Toronto, and back then there was a magic shop called the Arcade Magic Shop, and went in, and that was my first exposure to a magic shop, and it was like really cool. And so there were some of the old timers still hanging about. I didn't know who they were, but they suggested books. I still have like the Card Magic of Lee Paul in my collection from that I bought at that store. I don't know, probably 1975. So yes, that's how I started getting into it. Then there was a magic club, the Hat and Rabbit Club in Toronto, and then a second magic store opened up called the Browser's Den, and I actually worked there on Saturdays for a couple of years before going to university and losing all interest in magic. It was Western, and there was no real magic presence in London at that point that I could find. So the one magician I met stole a bunch of my magic magazines, and I fell in love with cinema. I just thought that was a really cool art form. It still is, but yeah. Well, also optical effects.
For
I
sure.
mean, Méliès,
Yes,
the
of
great,
course.
who developed half the camera tricks that we have today, before the advent of computers taking over and going in a different direction. Yeah, he was a genius, and he was a magician. So. Yeah, and I loved Méliès back in the day. And Orson Welles. I did my master's thesis on Orson Welles, who's also a filmmaker slash magician. I was living in LA, and anyone who knows LA knows there's a lot of traffic. And so if you're going to a meeting at a production company, you have to get there really early. And so I was just killing time walking around Hollywood, and there was this... I look in this shop window, and there's a picture of Orson Welles, like my hero. And I go, oh, it's a magic shop. It was Hollywood Magic. So I went in there, and I brought back all this flood of memories of when I was, working in a magic shop in Toronto. And then somebody gave me a pass to the Magic Castle. Guy behind the counter. And I was just like, yeah, I'll go. I used to read Di Vernon, great Canadian magician, one of the great sleight of hand inventors of all time. He had a column in Genie magazine that I read every month, and it was all about the Magic Castle. So it loomed large in my imagination. I had never been. Doogie. Yeah, he was president of the Magic Castle for a while, and that's Neil Patrick Harris. And it really marked the turnaround financially, where suddenly it became a cool place to go to. I lived in LA for many years, and I would go once a week to the castle. It was fantastic. Yeah, magic was quite different when I was in the 70s, when I was into it as a kid. Stage magic, floating canes, the elegant top hat magician was still holding sway. And in the years I left, I basically missed the whole Copperfield era. So those kind of breaking the mold illusions, and I missed the rise of things like bizarre magic, which is, a little darker and more storytelling oriented. Mentalism became very popular. Street magic became very popular. When I came back to magic, it was like, whoa, it's so different. I felt a little depressed because I thought I'm never going to catch up. But I found that all my years in filmmaking as a screenwriter and director, it was applicable to magic, because still, I found magicians weren't necessarily writing well. They were, it was, so yes, I was able to take what I'd learned. I wasn't like wasted years. All the stuff I'd learned in filmmaking is definitely applicable to magic. So I kind of rose quickly through the ranks of the magic community, just because, well, one, it's a very welcoming community, but number two, I had a different set of skills than everybody else, and that was valued, I think. There was always a storytelling trait, this most of magic is not really storytelling oriented, it seems. You're doing a trick. I've got a card trick. Or sometimes you have, goofy little stories that don't really make much sense. But always there have been great storytellers who are using their magics from the golden age of magic, doing a stage production of A Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, huge illusions, telling this great story, and that was always a part of magic. Robert Houdin told these great stories with his magic. It became popular again, I think, with Copperfield, telling. I think he does, before he does his flying routine, where he levitates and goes around the room. I think it's like a minute and a half, 2 minutes of just him talking about how he always wished he could fly. So it was not just, hey, look at me, it was a wish fulfillment, which you could relate to. Tell the story and have a good effect that will be with the story. It's one of his big strategies, and worked great. And then on the more close-up side, you have the rise in the 80s of guys like Eugene Berger, who does a gypsy thread, which is a popular effect where he tears a thread apart and joins it back together. But as he's describing it, he is talking about the creation and destruction of the universe with a piece of thread. It is the whole string of time from beginning to end of the universe, all represented by this one thread. And it's just so beautiful. And so you can see that kind of poetic storytelling happening. And I think there's a resurgence now. I mean, David Blaine is, very pared down, but at the same time, there's a coexistence of storytelling and just do magic and figure it out, what this means to you. When I came back into magic, mentalism was one of the things that had gotten popular, and I fell in with this group, which is like this magic gang, that met every month in Los Angeles. And it was a mentalist group called the Elders. And famous mentalist, one of the most famous mentalists of all time, Max Maven, was in the group and became a very good friend of mine. Every month we'd get together and do mentalism, have people do effects and share ideas. Sometimes there were challenges. Okay, we're doing lottery predictions. Chris, you're doing an effect. I'm going, I am? Okay. And so I'd have to come up with a new lottery prediction effect. Stuff like that. It was really, really fun. So that and the Magic Castle were really inspiring me. And I just fell in with mentalists, and it's kind of fun because mentalism is one of those things where you're not sure if it's real or not. And I like that playful boundary between what's possible and what's not, which frankly is changing all the time. There is definitely a psychological aspect to mentalism, which I find very appealing, and I just got drawn more and more into kind of a psychological magic, sometimes returning to our shamanistic roots, as magicians, that, we are meant to, make people feel better, heal people. And there's all kinds of very ancient magic tricks that shaman would do, and probably, activated the placebo effect in people. but that can be powerful, and it does make you feel better. So I mean, one of my tricks recently was called Feel Better. It was my post-COVID effect, just like, okay, let's get some closure on this. So that kind of stuff interests me. There's a saying, I heard it originally from Gary Ousman, the photographer, but I think it predates him. It's called chance favors the prepared mind. If I see anything cool, I go, oh, what can I do with that? And that's just sort of being open and prepared. And sometimes it can be tiring. So there are times when I just take a break. I don't want to have a prepared mind. It's just open for the universe to come in, and it's like, but then I'll go into kind of a creative spree. Generally, when I'm feeling healthy and things are going well, then I find myself more creative. Well, the best received effect I'd put out would be the 100th Monkey. That's where, in its original form, you take away someone's ability to read. So David and Lehman did it on America's Got Talent, on Howie Mandel, and they got a standing ovation at the Kodak Theater. I was just off stage watching them, and try not to get nervous. And then that was great, because the clip that AGT put out got like 20 million views on YouTube, and I sold a lot and made some good money off it, and so I've had different variations since then of that effect. But it's a very powerful effect, because again, you don't know if it's real or not, what's really happening. So that's probably, I'm very proud of that one. I mean, some of the other effects I've done, I'm happy with. All Tied Up is one. I don't know, I read it was in Psychology Today. It was a piece on, psychologists were doing things if something was bothering you. I mean, we're basically primitive underneath our, exterior, civilized accoutrement. And if they have something that's bothering you, it often helps you to write that thing down that's bothering you and tear it to pieces. And that helps make you feel better. And it was like, oh, great. So I turned this into a card trick using something called Japanese cocologies. It was just another really interesting thing. They're like psychological games you play. And then at the end, I have somebody tear up a card that represents something they feel is holding them back in their lives. And so many people will cry at the end of it. And I remember once I went, I took my friend Max Maven, and we went to a magic show on the Queen Mary Hotel by Aidan Sinclair. And he did the effect. And the woman happened to be sitting next to Max and I that had torn up the card. And she sat down, and she was being held by her daughter. She's got her arms around, and she's crying. But she's relieved crying. Like it was a weight taken off. And Max is leaning over me, and he looks at me and goes, "Good trick." That, it doesn't get any better than that. Young people today, I did a lecture tour of 28 magic clubs in 2023. Traveled all around the U.S. and into Toronto. And but on the American lecture tour, people have stopped going to clubs. The average age in some clubs is like 60. And those people aren't, the young people are not going to those clubs. So they're not drawing on the magical knowledge of would-be mentors. They are looking at YouTube, and YouTube has some good magic videos. You're learning. You know, if I want to use some trick some sleight of hand with cards, and I don't know what it is, I can just go onto YouTube and find out what it is. And I have used that resource. Usually the lay public doesn't know where to look. It's not like exposure videos. This is, you have to know the name to get to it. So that stuff is good. But on YouTube, it's just like, close shot of the magician's hands. There's no presentation. There's no story. It's just, this is what you do. Then you put this here in. And it's horrible. It's just the method. It's just the mechanical. And some of those guys have chops, technical chops, especially the cardistry stuff where they're like, juggling cards at their fingertips. And it's amazing. No presentation skills whatsoever because they're learning off YouTube or downloading magic from certain places that specialize in that. So you're getting a whole generation that rather than like going into, I lived in Oakville, so I'd have to go in to Toronto to go to these clubs in the evening. Fortunately, I had relatives I could stay with, but you made the effort to go to these places. You made the effort to go to clubs and also the magic shops, and just would hang out for hours. Always a table at the back where you could just, do it. And you learned from people. And they shared who they thought were really good. And even if you couldn't find, videos on YouTube back then, it was, now it's too easy. And so something is being lost. And, you find in certain clubs, they're just great. They're like populated, and there's some old timers and there's some young people, like Atlanta, huge place, Raleigh, North Carolina, huge, but also you have really good mentors who are really creative, not like you got to do it this way. It's like, show me what you got. And so I'm liking the club here. It's smaller, because Windsor's a small city, but the club in Detroit is really strong, and there's just some really strong clubs around, and that makes such a difference for young magicians coming up.
Away his ability to read. Can now no longer read. Right. Judges, yes or no? Can you read this word?
Yes.
Yes. Howie, yes or no? Can you read this?
What's not? Cannot. It's a word you know. Gorn poops?
What is it?
Gora poops?
People at home. But you
Gora
can read,
poops?
you can read this.
Why is that a word you know?